The year is 2025. A routine cargo shipment carrying critical supplies to a U.S. military base in the Middle East moves through one of the most volatile regions in the world, the Gulf of Aden. The crew is confident, well-trained, and equipped with the latest defensive systems. But something unexpected happens. In the stillness of the early morning, a rogue pirate ship, heavily armed, emerges from the mist. The crew of the U.S. cargo ship scrambles as a torrent of gunfire rings out. The pirates, intent on seizing the cargo, launch a devastating assault with rapid precision. It seems like another pirate attack in an increasingly chaotic world until a missile streaks across the sky, crashing into the pirate ship with surgical precision. The impact is catastrophic. Flames and debris scatter across the open sea. The pirates never saw it coming. In an instant, the balance of power shifts. But what was it that stopped an unstoppable force? What changed the tide of battle so quickly? This was no ordinary pirate attack. As the smoke clears, the crew of the cargo ship realizes something far more profound has occurred. It wasn't just a pirate attack. It was a highly coordinated response from forces far beyond what they had anticipated. Forces that had been watching and waiting. Was this an isolated incident or the beginning of a much larger geopolitical game, one where the stakes are higher than ever before? As the first missile tore through the pirate vessel, the Gulf of Aden went silent, except for the distant hum of a high-tech U.S. naval drone hovering above its sensors locked on the wreckage. It had been a calculated response, a hidden force waiting for the right moment. The pirate ship was no ordinary vessel. It was the front of a much larger operation, an operation that would soon escalate beyond any expectations. The cargo ship's crew was still reeling from the surprise. They were unaware that behind them, just out of sight, a fleet of U.S. Navy warships had been silently tracking the pirates' movements. The attack wasn't just an act of self-defense. It was a demonstration of advanced intelligence sharing and precision strike capability. This was a message to the pirates and to any other power that might contemplate challenging U.S. interests in this region. Minutes after the missile strike, the U.S. Navy's fifth-generation stealth fighter, the F-35C, was on station patrolling the skies above. The pilots, equipped with cutting-edge radar and thermal systems, had tracked the pirate vessel's movements well before the first shot was fired. As the pirates tried to maneuver their ship in a desperate bid to flee, they were unaware that an advanced electromagnetic pulse (EMP) weapon had just been activated from a U.S. Navy destroyer in the distance. The EMP hit hard, disabling the pirate ship's electronics in an instant. The pirates were left blind, their communication systems jammed and navigation rendered useless. This was a textbook demonstration of electronic warfare, a battle not just of firepower, but of information and technology. But the story didn't end with the destruction of the pirate vessel. The pirates' initial strike had triggered a far more dangerous chain of events. Unbeknownst to the U.S. Navy, a secondary force, an Iranian-backed militia, had been monitoring the situation, waiting for an opportunity to exploit any weakness. By 03:30, as the pirates' wreckage smoldered on the waves, a massive radar blip appeared on the U.S. Navy screen. It wasn't one vessel, but an entire flotilla of Iranian fast attack boats, fast-moving and heavily armed, closing in on the region. Their mission was clear: to capture the U.S. cargo ship, or at the very least seize the weapons and supplies aboard it. But the Navy was ready. With the F-35 still airborne, the USS Ronald Reagan, an aircraft carrier stationed nearby, launched a series of precision-guided bombs targeting the incoming flotilla. The bombs were designed to disable the fast boats without sinking them, keeping tensions high but not escalating into full-scale war. The first strike came at 04:15 as the bombs dropped with surgical precision. At the same time, the USS Mesa Verde, an amphibious transport dock, activated its integrated air defense system. The system, a combination of Aegis ballistic missile defense and CRAM, targeted incoming anti-ship missiles fired by the Iranian boats. These advanced layered defense systems ensured that no missile would get through. The battle became a high-stakes cat-and-mouse game, U.S. warships launching precision strikes, Iranian boats retaliating with missile barrages, and unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, providing constant surveillance. This wasn't just a firefight. It was a deadly choreography where the slightest misstep could trigger global conflict. By 05:00, the pirate threat had been neutralized, but the danger had not passed. The Iranian flotilla was still pressing forward with no signs of backing down. As tensions escalated, the question loomed large. Was this a rogue militia acting on its own, or a signal of something far greater? A new geopolitical alignment that would challenge U.S. influence in the region. The stakes had just been raised. The escalation was not just tactical, it was deeply strategic. As the Iranian flotilla closed in, the U.S. Navy was forced to adapt rapidly to an unfolding situation that had moved far beyond the initial pirate skirmish. It was no longer just about protecting a cargo ship. It was about asserting control over a critical maritime choke point that was vital to global trade and military logistics. By War 530, the Iranian flotilla, now reinforced by additional speedboats and missile-armed drones, was in range of the U.S. vessels. The U.S. Navy had already executed what could be called an intercept and contain strategy, designed not to escalate the situation into a broader conflict, but to assert overwhelming superiority. Every move, from the launch of drones to the deployment of surface-to-air missiles, was meticulously calculated to protect U.S. interests while avoiding full-scale engagement. The USS Ronald Reagan, with its fleet of FA-18EF Super Hornets, had already launched several sorties. The Super Hornets, armed with advanced precision-guided munitions, flew at treetop levels, evading radar detection and swooping down to deliver pinpoint strikes against the Iranian fast boats. These strikes were designed to disable, not destroy, limiting the risk of civilian casualties and escalating the situation. The precision of these attacks sent a powerful message: the U.S. could project force rapidly and with deadly accuracy, but always with calculated restraint. Meanwhile, the USS Mesa Verde maintained its position, its advanced radar and sensor systems working in harmony with the Navy's network of drones. The CRAM system had already intercepted several incoming missiles, its Phalanx CIWS close-in weapon system shredding the projectiles with its rapid-fire cannons. This was no ordinary engagement. It was a high-tech war of nerves, with every faction testing the limits of military technology and resolve. The Iranian boats, although armed and fast, were no match for the U.S. Navy's integrated defense systems. They tried launching a counteroffensive at 0600, but the U.S. had already outmaneuvered them. As the boats launched their missile salvo, a wave of countermeasures was deployed. Chaff and flares filled the sky, confusing the enemy's targeting systems. The missiles veered off course, detonating harmlessly in the sea. But this was no time to relax. The U.S. Navy knew that the Iranian threat wasn't over. It was likely only the beginning of a larger push to challenge U.S. dominance in the region. At 0630, the Pentagon ordered a call for reinforcements, a multi-pronged response to ensure the integrity of American interests. Just as the Iranian flotilla began to falter under the onslaught, the unexpected happened. An S-400 surface-to-air missile system stationed along Iran's coastline launched its own strike. The missile streaked through the sky, heading directly toward the USS Ronald Reagan. The U.S. Navy's anti-missile defense systems kicked into action. The Aegis ballistic missile defense system, renowned for its ability to intercept missiles mid-flight, targeted the incoming threat. The scene was tense. Every second mattered. Would the missile be intercepted in time? At 0650, the Aegis system fired its own intercept missile. The two projectiles collided in mid-air with a deafening explosion. The S-400 missile had been neutralized. Yet even as the immediate threat from the Iranian flotilla began to wane, the larger implications of this encounter began to sink in. The U.S. Navy's precise, overwhelming response had neutralized a direct attack. But at what cost? The world was watching. Every major player, Russia, China, NATO, and Iran, had been observing how the U.S. responded to the latest escalation in the Gulf of Aden. This wasn't just a regional conflict. It was a proxy battle for global influence, where every move counted. What would come next? As the dust settled and the immediate danger from the Iranian flotilla subsided, the global balance had irrevocably shifted. The U.S. Navy's rapid, coordinated response had not only eliminated the threat, but had sent shockwaves through geopolitical circles. However, the battle was far from over. The world had seen the power of U.S. military assets, but it had also seen the vulnerabilities that could be exploited in the future if not addressed. By Orno 7, the Pentagon had dispatched additional naval forces to reinforce its position in the Gulf of Aden. The USS Nimitz, another aircraft carrier, was already en route, its fleet of Super Hornets prepared to provide air superiority. Meanwhile, reconnaissance satellites had begun to scan the Iranian coastline for
That
further
pirate lair a few hours later?
At 0730,
And why did dozens of
Iranian
pirate lairs
Revolutionary
across
Guard
East
Corps
Africa go
IRGC
dark the
made
next
its
day?
next move, this time not with traditional fast boats, but with a far more sophisticated weapon. A series of unmarked drones equipped with both explosive payloads and surveillance equipment launched from Iranian territory. The drones moved at high speed, utilizing low-altitude flight to avoid detection by U.S. radar systems. But the U.S. was prepared for this kind of warfare. The Navy's Electronic Warfare EW division had already analyzed Iranian drone tactics and implemented countermeasures. As the drones closed in on the U.S. ships, a U.S. Navy EA-18G Growler, an electronic attack aircraft, was airborne, ready to disrupt the Iranian drone's flight path. The Growler unleashed its payload of electronic countermeasures, sophisticated jamming signals that completely disrupted the drone's guidance systems. As the drones veered off course, they lost their target lock, crashing harmlessly into the sea. The effectiveness of the U.S. Navy's electronic warfare systems proved once again that control of the electromagnetic spectrum was as important as physical combat in modern warfare. By year 0, the situation had escalated. U.S. intelligence reports had confirmed that additional Iranian missile batteries were being deployed along the Strait of Hormuz. This critical choke point through which a substantial portion of the oil had become Iran's intentions were clear. It sought to deny U.S. confidence by any means necessary. In response, the U.S. launched a series of reconnaissance flights. F-22 Raptors, the U.S. Air Force's premier stealth fighter, moved into Iranian airspace undetected. The Raptors were equipped with cutting-edge radar systems and weapons capable of neutralizing air and surface threats. The primary mission was to assess the enemy's missile defense capabilities and relay this intelligence back to U.S. commanders. As the F-22s soared over the Iranian coastline, an unexpected discovery was made. Iranian forces had positioned anti-aircraft missiles in highly strategic locations hidden beneath civilian infrastructure, making them nearly impossible to target without risking collateral damage. The U.S. was facing a dilemma: strike the missile batteries directly or use a more cautious intelligence-gathering approach to avoid further escalation. At 8:45, the U.S. command structure made a critical decision. They decided to initiate Operation Eagle Eye, a calculated multi-stage plan to disable the Iranian missile network while minimizing risk to both American and civilian lives. The operation would involve a combination of precision airstrikes and cyber operations aimed at temporarily disabling Iranian missile defense systems. The F-22 Raptors dropped low their radar systems, scanning for the precise locations of the anti-aircraft missile batteries. Simultaneously, a team of U.S. Cyber Command specialists launched a series of cyber attacks infiltrating Iranian missile control networks and scrambling communications. Within minutes, the Iranian missile systems went offline, unable to track the incoming airstrikes. At 9:00, the first round of airstrikes began. Precision-guided munitions were launched from the F-22s, hitting the missile sites with surgical accuracy. The first wave of strikes was a success. Key Iranian missile batteries were disabled without causing significant civilian casualties. However, this was no victory lap. The operation had caused a ripple effect across the region. Iranian media broadcasted the strikes in real time, framing them as an act of aggression by the United States. The propaganda machine was in full force, aiming to rally not just Iranian citizens, but sympathetic factions across the region. The United States, despite its overwhelming technological superiority, was now in a battle for hearts and minds as much as for territory. The geopolitical ramifications of the airstrikes were clear. Iran's allies, including Russia and China, would not stand idly by. As the day wore on, it became clear that this conflict, once viewed as a skirmish, had evolved into a larger regional confrontation. The U.S. Navy had demonstrated its ability to dominate in the maritime environment, but the ground had shifted. Now the battle would be fought not just on the sea and in the skies, but in the court of international opinion. Just as the U.S. Navy was beginning to gain the upper hand, and the skies above the Gulf of Aden seemed to calm, a new and unexpected threat emerged from the digital realm. In the early hours of the afternoon, just as the USS Nimitz prepared for another round of airstrikes, a massive cyber attack was launched against the U.S. Naval Fleet's communications network. It wasn't just a localized attack, it was a coordinated assault on the very heart of U.S. military command and control. Within moments, encrypted communications between the ships and their command centers were jammed. Pilots in the air found their communication channels scrambled, making it difficult to relay real-time intelligence. The once precise, seamless coordination of U.S. forces was now under siege by a mysterious and highly advanced cyber adversary. The U.S. Navy was no longer fighting a conventional battle. This was warfare in the digital age where the lines between physical combat and cyber warfare were blurred. While the U.S. Navy had the technological edge in traditional defense, this unseen silent assault threatened to undermine everything. At 12:10, the full scale of the cyber attack became apparent. The U.S. fleet's radar systems began to flicker, and the ship's GPS systems went dark. The Iranian forces anticipating such an attack had deployed a cyber warfare unit supported by Russian experts who had spent years developing tactics to disrupt the most advanced military networks. In that moment, the U.S. military faced a new kind of battle, one fought in the shadows of the digital world. As U.S. cyber defense teams scrambled to regain control, the attack's origin became clearer. An advanced hacking group reportedly backed by a hostile nation-state had infiltrated the U.S. Navy systems, rendering their defensive capabilities momentarily useless. The very technologies that had once given the U.S. an unquestionable advantage were now vulnerable. This cyber assault didn't just affect U.S. military systems. It quickly spread to allied forces in the region, NATO's surveillance satellites, intelligence sharing platforms, and even communication lines between U.S. Navy personnel and their European counterparts. Within hours, key military operations were either delayed or completely altered. The timing of the Iranian counterattack was precise by targeting U.S. naval infrastructure. At this critical juncture, the hackers had managed to put NATO forces at a disadvantage, potentially shifting the balance of the conflict. As the U.S. scrambled to implement contingency plans, the cyber attack was followed by a ground-based escalation. A Russian-backed militia operating out of Syria began launching long-range artillery at key U.S. Navy positions. This was the twist that no one had anticipated: a synchronized digital and conventional assault. By 1430, the U.S. Navy was fighting on two fronts, one in cyberspace, where its systems had been compromised, and the other in the physical realm, where Russian artillery units were now targeting U.S. supply lines and troop positions. This multifaceted warfare was unlike anything seen before. It wasn't simply the deployment of weapons and tanks on the ground, it was the full integration of digital warfare, economic pressure, and traditional military force. The battlefront had expanded, and it had become a global war fought in the cyber domain on the seas and in the hearts of people watching from all corners of the world. The question now was simple: how could the U.S. respond? The traditional tools of war had been undermined, and the very core of military power, the ability to communicate, to coordinate, to control, was now at the mercy of sophisticated, unseen adversaries. Was this the beginning of a new kind of warfare, where military superiority was no longer about hardware, but the ability to control the digital landscape? The events of the past 24 hours had fundamentally reshaped the military calculus of the region. What had started as a routine naval operation to defend a U.S. cargo vessel from pirate attack had spiraled into a complex multi-theater conflict driven not just by conventional forces but by cyber warfare and geopolitical maneuvering. Strategically, the outcome of this engagement had far-reaching implications. The U.S. Navy, despite its technological superiority and unmatched defensive capabilities, found itself tested on multiple fronts on the open sea, in the air, and within the digital domain. The layered defense systems, such as the Aegis Ballistic Missile Defense (CRAM) and the F-22 Raptors, had proven their worth in intercepting missiles and securing air superiority. But the cyber attack revealed a critical vulnerability in the U.S. military's infrastructure, one that could potentially be exploited in future conflicts.
That pirate lair a few hours later?
For decades,
And why
the US
did dozens of
military had
pirate
relied on
lairs
its
across East
technological
Africa go
as a
dark the next
cornerstone
day?
of global power projection. Its advanced weaponry, radar systems, and stealth technologies were considered invulnerable. However, this conflict proved that the battlefield is no longer confined to the physical realm. The emergence of cyber warfare capable of crippling a superpower's ability to operate in real time shifted the global military paradigm. The Iranian-backed militia, with assistance from Russian cyber operatives, had successfully paralyzed key communication and navigation systems. The nature of warfare had changed. From a strategic standpoint, the U.S. Navy had achieved its immediate objective, protecting the cargo ship and neutralizing the Iranian flotilla. Yet it had failed to avoid a broader, more insidious escalation. The Iranian regime, emboldened by their ability to disrupt the U.S. Navy's technological infrastructure, would likely continue to challenge American interests in the region. The Russian intervention, whether through direct support of Iranian forces or through cyber
Mind
collaboration, was
Warfighting
also a
Development
stark
Center.
reminder of the growing
Being part
axis of resistance to U.S. influence. On the geopolitical stage, this conflict would reverberate far beyond the Gulf of Aden. NATO no loyal to the Trojan crossfire, while U.S. forces were preoccupied with immediate physical threats. Europe found itself at the mercy of Russian and Iranian missiles. This underlines the importance of information warfare and the necessity for NATO to strengthen its own cyber defenses, which has proven critical to maintaining alliance cohesion during the conflict. The U.S. response to these challenges would set the tone for its relations with both NATO and its adversaries in the future. Moreover, the global media narrative had already begun to take shape. The U.S. Navy's technological triumphs were overshadowed by the cyber attack. While the U.S. was quick to neutralize the Iranian flotilla, the larger geopolitical dynamics and the invisible war in the cyber realm were the focus of headlines worldwide. This event would undoubtedly be used as a propaganda tool by adversaries seeking to undermine U.S. credibility, even if the strategic victories were clear. Economically, this engagement would have consequences as well. The straits through which the conflict unfolded, the Strait of Hormuz, are critical for global oil transport. The ripple effects of the violence combined with the uncertainty about future disruptions in maritime security could send shockwaves through international energy markets. Nations dependent on oil from this region would need to reconsider their supply chains, potentially accelerating investments in alternative energy sources and military solutions. The question remained whether the U.S. could maintain a dominant position or whether it would need to reassess its forward presence in the region to ensure both energy security and geopolitical stability. Finally, there was the military cost. Although the U.S. Navy's defensive systems, air superiority, and intelligence capabilities had performed admirably, the true cost of this conflict was not just in the thousands of dollars spent on munitions, but in the risks of escalation. The digital vulnerability exposed by the cyber attack had implications for U.S. power projection worldwide. As adversaries and adversarial alliances continued to develop cyber capabilities, the threat of asymmetric warfare where digital vulnerabilities could cripple a nation's ability to wage war was no longer hypothetical. It was a reality. The lesson was clear: military dominance could no longer rest solely on advanced weapon systems. The new theater of war was also fought in the ether, the digital battlefield. For the U.S. to maintain its military superiority, its next strategic moves would need to focus not only on tanks, missiles, and aircraft, but also on strengthening the cyber defenses of every asset in its arsenal. As the dust settled in the wake of this high-stakes confrontation, one thing became undeniably clear: the world had just witnessed the fragility of global order in the face of modern warfare. The battle in the Gulf of Aden wasn't just a clash between nations or military might, it was a clash of ideologies, technologies, and the balance of power itself. For the United States, this engagement was both a victory and a cautionary tale. On the one hand, it had successfully neutralized the immediate threats to its cargo vessel and demonstrated unparalleled military capability, especially in maritime dominance, air superiority, and advanced defense systems. The U.S. Navy had showcased the effectiveness of its high-tech weaponry, from precision-guided munitions to electronic warfare systems. But beneath these victories lay a deeper, more unsettling reality: the U.S. was no longer fighting just with bombs and bullets. It was now engaged in an all-encompassing, multifaceted global conflict. The cyber attack against the U.S. Navy revealed a terrifying vulnerability in the digital age. No nation, no matter how powerful, could afford to ignore the threats lurking in the shadows of cyberspace. This battle had not only tested the strength of the U.S. military's hardware, but had also exposed the gaping holes in its defense against asymmetric warfare. The U.S. could deploy advanced weaponry to decimate its enemies, but in the end, what had nearly crippled the Navy was not an enemy missile or a pirate ship, but an unseen force in the form of a digital assault. The consequences of this engagement would echo for years to come. The geopolitical landscape would inevitably shift. Nations like Iran, Russia, and China, emboldened by this challenge to U.S. hegemony, would recalibrate their strategies. Iran would likely continue to push the boundaries in the Strait of Hormuz and beyond, while Russia's continued support of cyber warfare and hybrid tactics would make its presence even more felt in the Middle East and beyond. For the U.S., maintaining military dominance would require more than just superior firepower. It would require an all-encompassing approach to security, one that balanced traditional strength with cutting-edge cyber defense intelligence capabilities and diplomatic finesse. This was a sobering reminder of the high cost of war, not just in terms of military assets, but in human lives, global stability, and national security. The military-industrial complex that sustains U.S. military power cannot afford to be complacent. Cybersecurity, economic leverage, and international alliances must now be seen as integral parts of the defense strategy. This incident, while a tactical success for the U.S., underscored that power without adaptability in the face of modern threats is a dangerous illusion. What's at stake here is more than just military superiority. It is the preservation of global order, the ability to ensure that the maritime highways that connect the world remain open, secure, and under the influence of those who uphold peace and stability. The message is clear. Strength is the cornerstone of peace. The U.S. military's overwhelming force may deter chaos in the short term, but only through preparedness, adaptability, and strategic foresight can true global order be maintained. In the end, the U.S. Navy proved that even when faced with unseen challenges, its technological might and strategic agility remain unchallenged. But as the world shifts into a new era of warfare, one fought across multiple domains, the question remains, will the U.S. remain ready for the next unseen challenge? Only time will tell.